my photograph, I remember very specifically. I had my practice beforehand, I'd been doing self-portraits, drawing self-portraits, and I started taking photographs thinking I would draw from the photographs, but right away the power of photography took over and I started just making photographs. This particular photograph was in a neighbor's backyard in Tuxedo after midnight. I was bare naked, running around with these dolls. I'll never forget, I took several photographs. It was with infrared film. I lost my glasses at one point. I heard the neighbor's dog starting to bark, and I thought, oh, shit. What the hell is going to happen here? Because I was buck naked, and I couldn't find my clothes because I couldn't find my glasses. So that's the context of this photograph. 2 came out of that photo series, Self-Portrait in Field of Dolls 1, and this is Self-Portrait in Field of Dolls 2. And in this particular instance, in this photograph, I became more aware of my androgynous body, which back then it was.
The photograph I have in the exhibition, Angèle on Church Street, was photographed in Moncton in New Brunswick while doing a residency. And it was the continuation of a body of work called the Mirror Series that I created between 2001 and 2003. I graduated with a BFA in 1999 in painting. So at the time, I probably still thought of myself more as a painter, but as I'd started doing photography in undergrad, and it really became the dominant practice. So I would say this is probably one of the first real bodies of work in photography that I created. And it continued my interest in the representation of the female figure and this desire not to fix the figure. So through this deconstruction, by fragmenting the figure, I was attempting on one hand to resist the viewer being able to fix their gaze on the image, while also attempting to speak to the impossibility of representing, the human subject because of the inherent complexity.
It's not really my mother. It's not a portrait of her. It just, it has to do with composition. It's just that, as you learn, fill the page. I taught that for such a long time. But it's just a female, it's just a figure. It could even be a man, I guess. But, there's just so much you can do with skulls. So you have to have something more interesting. But my mother was the most recently that has died in my life, and I think of it as mother, but it isn't really my mother. I went to register as a full-time student, I think it was in 1944 or 1954 or 53 or something like that. So because I was just a night student, one of those hobbyists that you can take it for credit or non-credit. And I decided at some point that I really wanted to be a full-time student. So I decided to go and register. And the registrar said to me, "Oh, my dear, you don't need this. Go home to your husband and your children," and would not register me. So I stewed about this for a day. And I went back fully equipped to have a big fight. But he so happened he wasn't there. He was teaching somewhere in the country. But a very nice young man, his name was Roland Wise, a wonderful painter, registered me, no problem. So here I am. Thank
you. I was a student at the University of Manitoba, and I didn't have any problems. The year before lived in Montreal, I'd gone to a cégep, and I met a woman, was one of my English teachers, and she was a hardcore feminist, and I just caught the bug. So maybe if there had been problems, maybe it would have been better because I would have had a better story to tell you. But really, the only good story I have, Ivan Eyre was my professor, and he taught me drawing, and I think it was my second year or third year. And I'd done this beautiful drawing of a turkey neck, glistening, wet, succulent, phallic turkey neck on a plate, severed, really clearly obvious about what it was, but of course I had no idea. And Ivan came up to me and said, "You're quite normal, aren't you?" I guess.
Well, for myself, I would say I didn't really feel any specific pressures to pursue a certain practice, or I never felt as though I shouldn't register, and I was lucky enough to be encouraged by my parents to pursue an artistic path, which is obviously not an obvious one in terms of making a living, but they had faith somehow it would work out. But what's interesting, I would say, is that still to this day, you know, the majority of the student body is probably around 60%, sometimes more, female student body to men. But you don't see that reflected in the faculty, and you don't really see that reflected in the art world. So there's that disjuncture, you know, that I experienced as a student, and I'm sure that, you know, my fellows here also experience. It's still true to this day.
I didn't have any great problems. You know, there was a few here and there, and we had our arguments and our discussions, and I stood up for myself, and that was it. I'd never been asked to do this or that specifically. I failed my exam of art history because I couldn't speak English too well, and so it was difficult for me to study the big words, and also, you know, the old school was very, very different from what happens today. I mean, the new art students should think of themselves as being in paradise, art paradise. Because we were in an old, dilapidated building where you had to carry the clay up to the attic, no elevator. And you know, I mean, the facilities were absolutely ridiculous, but we didn't know any better, so it was okay. So, you know, it was just a different world. I would say that, well, I had one interesting experience that is kind of silly, but when I was a night student, there was this man wandering around, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was a janitor because, you know, he wore blue jeans and a T-shirt. I was fairly new in this country, and, you know, and then I was told he was the director of the School of Art. You know, in my books, a director wore a suit and a tie and a shirt. And he said to me, because I didn't know him, but he's seen my work, I guess, in the class, and he said, "Why don't you take this seriously?" I thought I was taking it very seriously, but I now know what he meant. Get on with it.
Who was that?
And
Who was
then
this?
I had Cecil Richards. Cecil Richards, who was wonderful. He was incredibly encouraging and helpful. He was teaching ceramics and sculpture. Ceramics, I was a disaster, but sculpture, apparently, I did fine. So that's my story.
Well, I definitely remember Alison Norlin as an important studio prof. She was so engaged, and she took us all so seriously, and I think I started having her in second year and had her for at least a couple of years. So she played a really important role for me in art school, as well as Leslie Korek, who taught art history for a number of years. And it's unfortunate for the school to have lost her because she was such a passionate scholar, and, you know, it really wasn't a boring class to go to art history class. It was normally a debate. So I remember those two figures as being really important.
Well, it was a little difficult. I found out actually from an article that Pat Bovey wrote in a book that I was in the wrong profession. Apparently, women were not supposed to be sculptors. But I never heard that, so it was okay because I could do whatever I liked. And I must say I didn't have a whole lot of help from my men colleagues. And of course, you know, the main things were Bruce Head, Winston Leathers, Ivan Eyre, bless him, and I don't know who else, but basically these were the big guys of the 50s, and nobody ever, there was no Mawa, there was no, I never joined the feminist movement because I never knew it existed. So it was a little tough, but I just kept going.
Well, speaking of Mawa, my first year out of undergrad, I did the one-year mentorship program, which was a great transition space that I know a lot of young artists participate in. So essentially, that program teaches a lot of things you don't learn in school, how to survive as an artist, as a professional, how to apply for a grant, how to write an artist statement, how to prepare your CV, and continuing to do studio visits, you know, with one another, so creating a community outside of school. So I would say that Mawa continues to play this crucial role in our community, and we're really blessed to have that organization in Winnipeg. It's the envy of many other cities. So that makes, I think, gives this added confidence to a lot of women artists who, yeah, are questioning how are they going to make a living and how will they pursue their careers.
What I did once I graduated, I went to Madison for graduate school, came back, started working at North Nassau Printmakers, but also got really involved with the Manitoba Printmakers Association. So alongside my own practice as an artist, I also was one of the founding members of the Manitoba Printmakers, and that just took so much time because it was just, you know, at the very beginning level, and in some ways my career got sidetracked a little bit for a couple years. Myself and two other women were just organizing exhibitions, fundraisers, so but that, yeah, I think with it was a really exciting time. ASART had just begun around that time, and there's a lot of lovely energy going on, but that's nothing. My career was not held back by outside forces. It was sort of an internal force.
Well, Side Gallery occurred to me because, you know, I was fortunate enough to have an installation, I guess it was in the 80s. And I also realized that I'll never have another one, which was a surprise when I did. And I thought, you know, and some of our artists who are also here have exhibited nationally, some internationally, and nobody really knows about it. So I thought there should be a place where people can be juried up to a point and given a chance to show their work. Because there wasn't really very much. I mean, we won't mention some names that, you know, was a commercial gallery, but we won't talk about that one. So I actually was talking to Diana Whitehouse, and we had the same idea, except Diana had, you know, serious commitments, and so I went ahead and we organized it. And it was a wonderful place where we had some wonderful exhibitions and talks, and artists looked after things, and you could always talk to an artist when you came to the gallery. Unfortunately, we didn't get a government grant to continue, so after 10 years, we existed for 10 years, which is kind of amazing. After 10 years, we had to close because being on the board, we didn't want to go into debt. And yeah, so that's really what happened to Side Gallery.
It was interesting. I used to draw a lot. My degree is in printmaking, and then I stopped drawing when I started making photographs for many years. And then I had this exhibition that involved rabbits, and then I got a grant. Part of the grant was to draw the rabbits afterwards that I had stored in the refrigerator in my studio. And so the answer to this question is I've been teaching drawing for 10 years without drawing myself, and when I took the rabbits out of the refrigerator to draw them, I found that my drawing had changed because I'd been teaching drawing, and I was able to make better drawings. And I heard myself teaching the kids back to myself, teaching myself.
Well, I've taught for many years. So prior to teaching at the university, I taught for many years at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, in schools, in Artists in the Schools program and on across the country, teaching workshops. So teaching has always been a crucial part of my art practice. You know, I don't really see it as separate. It really does feed my practice, and I've done the test and queried whether just being in the studio full time was a better option for me. But in reality, I'm just like a dog chasing my tail. I really do need the space of academia. You know, I love being a student, and I've always loved being a student since I was a child. That's probably why I did 2 MFAs. Why else would you do 2 MFAs? And if I'm not a student, then I should be teaching. It's one way or the other, or sometimes both, you know. So for me, it's a fruitful place where, you know, it fuels my practice. It pushes me beyond my boundaries. It makes me uncomfortable. It challenges me, and I try to do the same things for the students. You know, so we're on the same path together, and it's cliche to say, but I definitely feel like Diana was talking about, you know, I learned so much from my students and from teaching my students, so.
And I had a little difficulty getting started because teaching in high school is very important, and I can get on a soapbox about that. But you're always dealing with elemental things, with beginners, with young people who really don't know. You have to get them enthused and involved. And teaching in Montreal, which I did for 5 years, high school is in Quebec and in Ontario, I don't know about Manitoba anymore, is a matriculation subject. So if you fail them, they are short a subject. And the only time you fail them is they don't do the assignments. It had nothing to do with talent or good work or anything like that. So that not too many fail, but it's a departmental exam, and you don't really know what the questions will be, so you can't really, help them with it. So and I really believe that high school art is very important. You don't try to create artists like in art schools, but you create art appreciators and art understandingers, whatever that means. And it's very exciting. And I had wonderful experiences with my students. And I would say the ones that took art in 8, 9, 10, 11, there was no 12, that was Cégep. We're at the stage of, I would say, almost a first-year art student or more. So I think it was very important, and I love teaching. But I found that for me to overcome this elementary thing took quite a while. And I didn't have my first solo show till I was 50. So there.
I've been a mentor, a part of the MAWA mentorship program, I think 5 or 6 times. There's that line in Hotel California, you can check out any time, but you can never leave. And my students are still, my mentors are still part of my life. My last few years teaching at the University of Manitoba, I was a sessional for over 25 years, much to my chagrin. And towards the end, I started boycotting being thesis advisors because we were paid $50, I think, for the year. But what I did with students that I became close to, I would have like a salon night. And there were, in the last 2 years I was teaching, there was about 5 of them. They would come over to my house I think we met 5 times throughout the year, and we would show each other our work. And we would critique it, and it was really wonderful. And I have to say, I really do miss teaching, but like I said, I still have those students that can check out any time but never leave, that contact me, and it's a real gift.
Well, similarly, I've been a mentee, and I have mentored through MAWA and through the Francophone community as well, which in many ways was not in the limelight. You know, I think music and theater in the Francophone community has always had a larger platform, but I think because of the isolation of the art practice, you know, the artists never really got together. And La Maison des Artistes, which now is definitely over 10 years old, is an organization that, you know, I was on the first board and I was the first artistic director, and I really took seriously then and continue to take seriously now my role within the community as a mentor, so that, you know, what happened to me was, of course, I just kind of got subsumed within the Anglophone art community. It was the dominant community in terms of art in Winnipeg. If I wanted a French experience, then I really needed to go to Montreal in terms of contemporary art. And it's not because there are no Francophone artists practicing in Manitoba, but we just kind of disappear within the larger community. And so that's an ongoing project of mine, and it's great to see that it has become, you know, a small lighthouse where young, emerging Francophone artists, but not just Francophone, like it's not this club, like it's an open space for all artists and for everyone in the community. And I've seen a lot of people from the Anglo and from the French come to art openings, and it's great to see that hub developing in St. Boniface. So I would say that's a central part of my work as a mentor. Well, as long as I can remember, I've been representing the female figure, and as I stated earlier, this project was an attempt to, in a way, you know, had these twofold strategy. But in terms of creating photography, that really all started out because when I was a painter, my source material, which was photographic, was coming out of culture. I was coming out of pop culture and from other sources in which I didn't have control. So, you know, I think from the critique I was getting from some of my painting profs, I realized, you know, I need to be the author of my images. I need to have greater control, and that's what led me to start doing photography. And as I started doing photography, a little bit like what Diane was talking about, you know, it kind of came alive in your hands. And at the time, I really felt as though the concerns that I was interested in engaging with, the concepts, the ideas, were, you know, I was finding something in photography that spoke more strongly to me at the time. And that's what pushed me to, to develop that practice.
Well, that night I took 36. I had a roll of 36. So I just was trying everything and anything. That one, I think that was one of the first ones where I actually used a flashlight. So it was totally dark, and I just illuminated my body with a flashlight. The reason I used it's a female body is because I'm female. That's sort of the answer to that one. It's sort of obvious. I also was really cheap.
And then I know that you did bring in actually
towards
some models.
Yep, that was about 5 or 6 years later. Yep. But what I also knew that I had to be naked because clothing, jewelry, anything else depicts so much of the time, and I wanted there to be a timelessness. What did surprise me was how androgynous my body appeared on film. That was quite a delightful surprise, and that actually led to the future work, which comes up with the next question. For me, it was really huge. Like I said, I can't believe it. When I grew up in the military, my dad was a pilot, and my mom was a nurse. My sister married a pilot. She became a pharmacist. My brother was a pilot. He married a nurse. And I remember in grade 12, in grade 12, I remember thinking, why would I want to go to high school? I'm just going to get married and have babies anyway. Because in the military, moms didn't work. You know, that's how I grew up. But then my father was stationed into Montreal, and I met this wonderful feminist artist, and she changed my life. And suddenly I realized, holy shit, I don't have to get married and have babies. Go forward a few years, Diane Whitehouse was a mentor of mine, and I started reading. I started making photographs and started reading people like Julia Kristeva. She talked about the male gaze, and I was doing photographs, and that I'll never forget, I was at an opening, and dear Bill Lobchuk came up to me and said, he called me Thorny Chuck, and I called him Bill Halobchi. So Lobchuk came up and said, so Thornycroft, I hear you're doing photographs with tits and asses. And I thought, oh God, he's right. Because I was thinking about the female gaze, and I thought, what if I got a penis? What if I got a fake penis and photographed myself? Because pornography, of course, is all about the gaze, desire, men looking at women, you know, and in pornography, you want to get horny enough that you can whack off, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, what if I suddenly included a penis on my body? So that the photograph, the male who might find it erotic would be looking at this female body and his eyes would go down and, uh-oh, uh-oh. And so I was really interested in the paradox of that. And that whole idea came through the feminist movement and the reading that I was doing at the time about castration complex, the phallic mother, and you know, all sorts of the Oedipal complex. So it was really, really an important time for me. I had fun. It was great.
So it's like, when you said that, it just made me think it's sort of like creating a disruption. And I think that a lot of your work does that, actually. I think it's
it was.
Stop.
I think the difference, I was making this work, and then I read about it later. Some people would read the text and then make work to fit the psychoanalysis theory that was going on. I just found it confirmed. But being subversive was really important for me. In that during the 90s, it was a really crucial part of my practice.
Well, I'm an inheritor, I would say, of, you know, the first wave of feminism. And when I was in university taking women's studies, I think that politicized me greatly, even though growing up, I always felt in my own household that, you know, I didn't feel like I was less than because of my gender. So I think it's I think when I was a young artist and even a student, it was maybe a sense of like, but it's not over, you know, like, women, take arms, like, we should continue this battle, because I already sensed, you know, that yeah, there was still this great inequality, and I just needed to look at how women were represented in society to understand, you know, how our position was viewed differently, and I found this greatly problematic. And to this day, you know, I have students who come to me and they are torn apart because of, you know, one student who's wants to do a photography project on rape, and it's regarding, and I don't have all the details because I got the story from her, but regarding that young girl who was gang raped in the US, I think in Ohio, and who's being vilified, being the victim, and that these poor boys' lives are going to be ruined because they're being prosecuted. And you know, I can't believe we're having this conversation in this day and age, and in, you know, the USA. You know, if we were talking about a different country, which would be also harsh to hear, it might come as being more expected. So those concerns, I think, are still greatly important, and you know, I don't really come with an agenda in my classroom, but I'm straight up about these are the realities that exist for women artists out there.
I am not as verbal as my colleagues here, which I really quite admire, because in my day you didn't justify what you did in the same way, and you didn't have to discuss all the politics and sexualities and all that sort of thing. And I always felt that I don't really like explaining my work, because I like people to bring something to my work from their own experience. And it really depends on your own experience. My experience is long and varied, very varied. So I bring some of that somewhere unconsciously or in some way into my work, but I don't know how to explain it. And I suppose if I knew how to explain it, I would probably start writing a book. But I don't want to do that either. I'd rather do art. Visual arts.
I'm doing sculpture these days because for me, it's whatever idea is important. I find the media to fit the idea. And that's, I think, what, Dominique, I'm sure you'd find the same way, right? You come up with an idea. I have done one video. I did do some performance years ago. I think you just, conceptually, that's the most important thing, is what the idea is, and then you find a means to do it. It's just for me, it's quite simple.
Yeah, I would say similarly, you know, I have a concept, and then it's an open terrain. You know, what discipline will I engage with? And most often it is multidisciplinary, and a lot of that work I see as research, and a lot of it won't ever see the light of day in any kind of public sense. So, and then it's through that process of making that certain things bubble up, and as they resonate, you know, that's what I grab hold of. But really always try to not have a predetermined attitude about what the thing should be. Of course, there are times when, you know, it's more a sensation of like, I just want to paint, or I just want to do this, and then it's more kind of a craving for the medium. But I really work more project-based, and so there's a specific concept subject that I'm exploring and take many pathways to explore this thing, to kind of feel it out in all these possible ways. But strangely enough, I would still say, and I can't quite exactly explain how, but I would say that, you know, I started as a painter, and ultimately I still think as a painter, and I still see as a painter. Even if I'm looking through a viewfinder, I'm still in some way seeing as a painter. So there's a kind of skew there that I think for me still exists.
Sculpture is three-dimensional, obviously, and you have to have an idea, and then you have to sustain it for a long time, because it will take a long time to get where you want to get. And you can't really preview or pre-see what's going to what it's going to end up. You do a little maquette, and that's just the idea, and then you build up a great big armature, which in itself has to work. And then you have to choose your medium, and there's a variety of mediums you can choose of, and you have to make decisions as to what medium you use, what table you use, what instruments or tools you use. It's a very, very long process, and in the process you keep changing. You maintain the basic idea, but sometimes it turns out very different than what you think it should or it would. And so the medium that you use is very important in the process. And I know that some of my work is cast in bronze, but it was very strange because many years ago I applied for the Canada Council grant, and I was refused because they considered that to be craft, not art. And they never understood that that was part of art, and actually the casting process is an art in itself, I would say, although it's pretty hands-on, which means kind of crafty. I don't know, but I come from a different era where I learned some things. Also, my practice in the studio was always limited to my, what I can use, because I didn't have any big, I don't know what you call it, big things to help me, like a hoist and you know, big sledgehammers and a welding machine. So I didn't learn all those things because I didn't want to learn it, because I just wanted to keep it at my speed. And so, you know, it has a lot of different things that I can talk about, but I don't think that's very interesting right now.
Please, I want you to join me in thanking all of them for joining us today and being so candid. Thanks very much.